Mail-order bride arrived a day too late, but the cowboy said, "You're right on time for me." Now let's dive into the story. The plain stretched wide and endless beneath a sky bruised with fading light. Dust swirled around the tracks as the last train of the day whistled into Dusty Creek, a weary, lonely sound that seemed to carry the weight of broken promises. Inside the passenger car, Clara Jennings sat stiffly in her best travel dress, pale blue with tiny white buttons, neatly pressed though the fabric had long lost its shine. She held a small leather satchel in her lap, her knuckles white around the worn handle. Inside it were all her belongings, a change of clothes, a Bible, and a letter that had changed her life. "Dear Miss Jennings, my name is Thomas Hale, a widower rancher in Dusty Creek. I seek a good, kind woman to share my life and home. Your letter spoke to my heart. If you'll come, I promise safety, care, and a partner's place beside me." She had read that letter 100 times, each word a fragile thread she'd used to stitch hope back into her heart. But the trip had been plagued by delays. A bridge washed out, a cattle herd blocking the line, then the storm. She arrived nearly 2 days behind schedule. When the train screeched to a halt, Clara stepped down, clutching her bonnet as wind whipped through her hair. She looked around, the platform was nearly deserted. A few men in dusty coats waited, some loading freight, others smoking and talking low. No man held a bouquet. No one looked her way. Her voice was soft, uncertain. "Excuse me, sir," she said to the station master, "I'm looking for Mr. Thomas Hale." He was expecting me. The man's expression faltered. He removed his hat, eyes full of pity. "Ma'am, you must be the lady from Missouri." Her breath caught. "Yes, I am." He looked down, voice thick with sympathy. "I'm real sorry to tell you this, but Mr. Hale passed yesterday. Horse threw him clean off near the ridge. Broke his neck." The words didn't register at first. They hung in the air, cruel and unreal. Clara's fingers loosened, the letter drifting from her grasp onto the platform boards. "No, no, that can't be." Her knees gave way and she sank to the bench. The station master hesitated, then gently picked up the letter and placed it beside her. "Funerals this morning. The town preacher's taking care of arrangements." Tears stung her eyes, but she forced herself upright. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you kindly." She watched the train hiss and pull away, leaving her behind in a cloud of dust, alone, abandoned by time and fate. Clara walked slowly through Dusty Creek's single dirt street, clutching her satchel like it was a lifeline. The townsfolk glanced her way, some curious, others whispering. She passed the blacksmith hammering metal, the general store with its creaking sign, and the church where she could hear a bell tolling softly in the distance. Her voice trembled in prayer. "Lord, I came all this way to start a new life. What do I do now?" No answer came, just the wind carrying the smell of rain. She stopped by the general store's porch to rest. Her shoes were caked in mud, her heart heavy. That's when a deep, calm voice spoke from behind her. "You look like a woman who's been through more than one storm." Startled, she turned. A tall man stood there, broad-shouldered and sun-worn, with dark hair brushing his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore a work shirt rolled to the elbows, a leather vest, and a hat tilted low. A coil of rope hung at his side, and the faint scent of saddle oil clung to him. He nodded politely. "Name's Elias McGraw." Clara straightened, brushing the dust from her skirt. "Clara Jennings. I was supposed to meet someone here." "I know," he said softly. "Thomas Hale. I was there this morning, helped dig the grave." Her lips parted, trembling. "You knew him?" "Not well," Elias replied. "But well enough to know he was a decent man." "You've had a rough ride, Miss Jennings. Ain't right being left here with no one." The emotion in her throat caught. "I'll find work. I can cook, sew, and tend to animals. I'll manage." He studied her, admiration flickering in his gaze. "You got grit. Not many do after what you've been through." The wind picked up, tossing a strand of her hair across her cheek. He hesitated, then offered her a steaming cup of coffee from a tin mug. "Come on, sit a spell. Ain't no sense standin' out here with the storm rollin' in." She took it with a trembling hand, the warmth seeping into her cold fingers. For the first time since the train arrived, someone's kindness steadied her. As thunder rolled in the distance, Elias said quietly, "You can stay at my place tonight. It's just me and the horses. Got a spare room. I'll see you safe." Clara blinked back tears. "That's too kind, Mr. McGraw. I couldn't impose." "You wouldn't be," he interrupted gently. "This land's got enough loneliness in it already. No need to add more." She nodded slowly, holding his gaze, the steady, unshaken eyes of a man who'd known loss himself. And as the first drops of rain began to fall, Clara Jennings, a bride without a groom, followed the quiet cowboy down the muddy road toward a ranch that would soon change both their lives forever. The rain came down hard that night, soaking the earth until the road turned to mud and the air smelled of lightning and dust. Clara clutched her satchel close as she followed Elias McGraw along the winding trail out of town. Each step squelched under her worn shoes, but she didn't complain, not when kindness had found her on the loneliest day of her life. Elias rode his horse slowly beside her, the animal's hooves thudding softly. "You sure you're fine walkin', Miss Jennings?" he asked, tipping his hat against the rain. "I'm fine," she said, though her skirts were heavy with water and her bonnet drooped against her face. "The air feels good after the train." He gave a quiet, approving nod. Most women would have turned back by now. "I don't have anywhere to turn," she answered softly. Something in her voice made him glance over. There was strength in her, fragile but unbroken, like a flower growing through cracked stone. By the time they reached Elias's ranch, the storm had swallowed the sky whole. The house stood sturdy on a rise, a weathered structure with a wraparound porch and a single lantern glowing in the window. The barn loomed nearby, horses shifting restlessly inside. Elias swung down from his saddle, then offered her a hand. "Careful now. Porch is slick." When she took his hand, it was rough, calloused, but steady, the kind of hand that built and healed and carried. Inside, the air was warm and rich with the scent of wood smoke. A fire burned low in the stone hearth, casting a soft glow across the small living room. The furnishings were simple but cared for, a sturdy table, a Bible on the mantel, and a quilt folded neatly across a chair. Clara stood near the doorway, dripping and unsure. "This is lovely," she murmured. He smiled faintly, taking her satchel. "Ain't much, but it's home." "You live alone?" "Been that way for a while," he said, busying himself with the kettle on the stove. "Lost my brother last winter. Got the ranch to keep me company." She lowered her gaze. "I'm sorry." He shrugged, though his jaw tightened. "Happens fast out here. Snow came early." He didn't make it to shelter in time. Silence filled the space, not awkward but heavy with unspoken pain. Clara took off her damp shawl, folding it carefully over a chair. "Thank you for taking me in, Mr. McGraw." "Truly." "Elias," he corrected gently. "You're welcome to stay here till you figure where to go next. There's a spare room down the hall. Sheets are clean, or clean enough." She smiled for the first time since arriving in Dusty Creek. Clean enough sounds like heaven. Later that night, the wind howled outside, rattling the windows. The rain beat against the roof, steady as a drum. Clara sat by the fire in one of Elias's oversized shirts he'd lent her, her travel dress drying by the hearth. Elias brought over 2 tin mugs of hot tea. "Ain't much, but it'll warm you. After today I'd call it a feast," she said softly, taking a sip. He sat across from her, elbows resting on his knees. The firelight flickered across his face, sharp and worn but kind. "You came a long way for a man you'd never met. That takes courage." "Maybe it takes foolishness," she said with a sad laugh. "I sold nearly everything to buy that ticket. Thought I was trading my loneliness for a future." "You were," he said. "Just didn't turn out how you expected." Her eyes lifted to his. "Do you believe things happen for a reason, Elias?" He looked into the flames, thinking. "Used to. Stopped when I buried my brother." She nodded, her voice soft but sure. "Maybe that's why God sent me here. To remind you to believe again." He glanced at her, something flickering in his eyes, the faintest trace of hope, fragile and unfamiliar. As the storm raged on, Clara felt her exhaustion finally take hold. She excused herself and slipped into the small guest room. It was simple, a bed, a window, and a handmade cross nailed above the frame. She sat down, brushing her damp hair loose, and whispered into the dark, "Lord, thank you for guiding me here. Even if I don't understand why." Outside, the thunder rolled, but inside there was peace. Elias lingered in the living room, staring at the closed door down the hall. Something in him, long buried beneath grief and silence, stirred again. He didn't know it yet, but the woman who'd stepped off that delayed train was about to change everything he thought he knew about timing, loss, and love. He poured the last of the tea into the sink, muttering to himself with a faint, wry smile. "Right on time, huh?" And as lightning lit up the plains, he whispered to the empty room, "Guess we'll see about that." The morning after the storm dawned gray and still. The air smelled of wet earth and pine, and the land glistened with the kind of calm that only follows a night of fury. Clara stood by the window of her small room, brushing her hair in the faint light. Outside she could see Elias in the yard feeding the horses. The sky behind him was soft gold, the sun barely cresting the hills. For a moment she simply watched, the way he moved with quiet strength, the way the horses seemed to trust him completely. He wasn't a man of many words, but his silence carried peace, the kind she'd been chasing her whole life. When she stepped into the kitchen, Elias was already there, setting down a plate of biscuits and a pot of coffee. "Mornin', Miss Jennings," he said without turning. "It's Clara," she corrected gently, smiling. "And good morning." He nodded. "You sleep all right?" "Better than I have in weeks. You're home, it feels safe." His eyes flickered toward her just briefly. "Ain't much, but I try to keep it that way." They ate quietly, the sound of wind brushing against the shutters. Then Elias cleared his throat. "You got plans for the day?" "I was thinkin' I might stop by town, see if the storekeeper needs help or the church kitchen. I can earn a little money till I figure where to go." He frowned slightly, not unkindly. "Town's fine, but keep your head down. Sheriff's been riled lately. Some fella's gone missin'. Word is he's wanted for stealin' railroad funds back east. Folks say he might have hopped a train this way." Clara froze. Her spoon clinked softly against her cup. "Did they say his name?" Elias shrugged. "Nathaniel Brooks, I think. Bookkeeper. Traveled under false papers. They say he's dangerous. Desperate men always are." Her stomach twisted. She knew that name. Nathaniel Brooks. The quiet man in the corner of her train car. The one who'd looked over his shoulder every few minutes. The one who'd helped her with her suitcase when the storm hit. The one who'd told her softly, "You seem like someone who believes in second chances." She remembered the look in his eyes, haunted but kind. Not the kind of look that belonged to a criminal. Later that morning, Clara walked into town with Elias's old raincoat draped over her shoulders. The streets were still muddy, the wood-planked sidewalks slick. She stopped at the general store, offering to help sweep and unpack goods in exchange for a small meal. Mrs. Carter, the storekeeper's wife, smiled kindly. "You must be the poor widow bride everyone's talking about. The one who came too late." Clara stiffened. "I suppose that's me." "Well, sugar, don't you fret. The Lord's got his own clock. Sometimes a delay's the only way to steer you right." Clara smiled faintly, grateful for the words, but her peace didn't last long. Just as she finished sweeping, two deputies came through the door. Their boots dripped water, and one of them slapped a wanted poster down on the counter. "Keep your eyes open, folks," the taller deputy said. "Nathaniel Brooks, fugitive accountant. Last seen boarding a westbound train before the storm hit. Might be hiding out round these parts." Clara's heart skipped. She forced herself to look. The sketch wasn't perfect, but the resemblance was there, the same weary eyes, the same shadow of a beard. Mrs. Carter crossed herself. "Heavens, hope he ain't anywhere near here." Clara smiled weakly and mumbled something about needing air. She stepped outside, gripping the porch railing to steady herself. The train delay. The storm. The whispers among passengers. It all came back like a riddle she hadn't known she was part of. Could it be that Nathaniel was on that train because he was running? And if he was, where was he now? By the time she returned to Elias's ranch, dusk had fallen again. The wind was picking up, cold and sharp. Elias was out near the barn, lantern in hand, checking the horses. Clara approached quietly, her skirts brushing against the damp grass. "Everything all right?" she asked softly. He looked up, surprised. "Didn't hear you come up. Thought you'd stay in town a spell." I just wanted to be back before dark." "Good thinkin', Dot." He set the lantern down and rubbed the back of his neck. "Got word from the sheriff today. That fugitive I mentioned, seems they think he's headed toward the mountain trail. Means he might pass close to us." Clara's heart thudded. "You don't think he's dangerous?" "Don't rightly know," Elias said, glancing toward the shadows near the barn. "But out here, desperation makes men do foolish things." The horses shifted uneasily. One snorted, ears pricked toward the back wall of the barn. Elias frowned. "Stay back." He lifted the lantern, walking slowly toward the dark corner. Clara's breath caught as she followed a few paces behind. There. Movement. A shadow darted between the stalls. Then a figure stumbled forward into the light, drenched, trembling, eyes wide with fear. "Please," the man gasped. "Don't shoot. I'm not here to steal. I just need a place to rest." Elias raised the lantern higher, and Clara's hand flew to her mouth. "Nathaniel?" she whispered. The man's eyes widened. Recognition flickered across his face. "You, from the train." Elias's voice was low, steady. You best start talking, friend. Sheriff says there's a price on your head. Nathaniel raised his hands, desperate. I didn't steal nothing. They're framing me. I found something I wasn't supposed to, records, money missing from higher up. They blamed me to keep me quiet. His words came fast, trembling with fear. I ain't armed. I just needed somewhere to hide till I figure how to clear my name. Elias studied him, every muscle tight, every instinct telling him not to trust too easy. But there was something in the man's eyes, not the cold glint of guilt, but the exhaustion of a soul worn thin. Clara stepped forward. He's telling the truth, she said softly. I saw him on the train. He helped me when the storm hit. He could have hurt me then if he wanted to. Elias didn't lower the lantern. I'm not saying I believe him. But I ain't handing anyone over without knowing what's true. He looked at the fugitive, then at Clara, then toward the rain beyond the barn doors. Fine, he said finally. You'll stay here tonight. But come sunrise. His eyes hardened. I'll decide what happens next. As thunder rolled again in the distance, Clara looked at Elias, standing firm between danger and mercy, and realized something stirring in him that she couldn't yet name. It wasn't just decency. It was faith, the kind that had gone quiet for years but was slowly, steadily waking up. And deep down Clara felt it too. Her train delay, the storm, this stranger's arrival, none of it was coincidence. Something was unfolding, something bigger than all three of them. The wind howled through the night like a wounded creature, whistling between the cracks of the old barn. Elias stood beneath the low rafters, the lantern's light trembling in his hand. Before him, Nathaniel Brooks stood soaked to the bone, his chest heaving with fear and exhaustion. Mud streaked his trousers. His hands were trembling as he tried to steady himself. Clara stood behind Elias, half hidden in the shadows, her heart racing. Elias's voice was quiet but hard as flint. Start from the beginning. Nathaniel swallowed. I was a bookkeeper for the Western Freight Company back east. I found numbers that didn't add up, big money gone missing. I told my supervisor. 2 days later, the railroad offices caught fire. Records destroyed. They pinned it on me. You expect me to believe that? Elias asked. Nathaniel's voice cracked. I didn't take a cent. I ran because the men who did, they've got reach. Friends in law offices, sheriffs in their pocket. If they catch me, I'll hang before I can prove anything. Clara stepped closer, her tone soft but sure. Elias, I saw him on the train. He was frightened, yes, but not guilty. He helped an old woman lift her trunk when no one else would. That's not a thief's heart. Elias turned his gaze to her, then back to Nathaniel. His jaw tightened. You're a skin meat to risk a lot for a stranger. Nathaniel looked down, voice breaking. I ain't a skin for trust. Just a night's shelter. I'll be gone by sunrise. Rain beat against the roof, each drop echoing the weight of his words. Elias stared at the man long enough for silence to grow heavy between them. Then finally he lowered the lantern a little. You'll stay in the loft, he said gruffly. No weapons, no wandering off. You so much as twitch wrong, I'll end this conversation with lead. Nathaniel nodded gratefully. Understood. Elias gestured to the hay ladder. Get some rest. We'll talk more come morning. Nathaniel climbed up slowly, shoulders sagging with relief. Clara lingered as Elias extinguished the lantern and turned toward the house. You did the right thing, she said softly. Elias grunted. I did what made sense for tonight. Tomorrow it might not. Still, she said, following him through the rain, you gave him a chance to be heard. Not many would have done that. He stopped at the porch, his eyes meeting hers in the dim light. You got a kind way of seeing folks, Clara. Maybe too kind. Kindness ain't weakness, she said gently. It's what keeps the world from going dark. He didn't reply, just opened the door and let her inside. But something in her words stuck, echoing through his thoughts long after the lamps were dimmed. Later that night, Elias sat at the table, cleaning his rifle in silence. The storm outside had quieted to a soft drizzle. Clara moved quietly around the kitchen, folding towels and setting a kettle on the stove. You don't trust him, she said finally. Elias looked up. I don't trust much of anyone. Because of your brother? She asked softly. His jaw tightened, but he nodded. He trusted a man once, thought he was a friend. Got him killed out in the hills. Since then I learned, faith's a fine thing but it don't stop bullets. Clara came closer, her voice barely above a whisper. Maybe not, but it might stop a heart from turning cold. He looked at her, really looked at her. The soft curve of her face in the firelight, the earnestness in her eyes. It stirred something in him he hadn't felt in years, something dangerous and tender all at once. You ever get tired of believing the best in people? He asked. She smiled faintly. Every day. But I reckon I'd rather be wrong for trustin' than right for hatin'. The kettle whistled softly. Clara poured him a cup of coffee, then one for herself. The rain had turned to mist, pattering softly against the window panes. Elias, she said after a long pause, you could have turned him in tonight. Why didn't you? He leaned back in his chair, staring at the fire. Because when a man's desperate, I can tell whether he's runnin' from guilt or from the kind of evil that hides behind a badge. She smiled, her voice warm. So you do believe him? He gave a half smile. Let's just say, I don't believe he's the only one who's been wronged in this world. In the barn loft, Nathaniel lay awake, staring through a crack in the roof where the stars peeked faintly through. He could hear their voices drifting faintly from the house, low, steady, kind. For the first time since the fire, he let himself breathe. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't alone in this fight. Back inside, the fire had burned down to embers. Clara rose from her seat. I should rest. Tomorrow's a new day. Elias nodded, eyes still on the flames. Yeah, tomorrow. As she disappeared down the hallway, Elias whispered to himself, what in blazes am I getting into? But in his heart he already knew. He wasn't just protectin' a fugitive anymore. He was protectin' a second chance, for all of them. And come morning, he'd have to decide whether to let the law take its course, or trust the voice inside him that said some truths were worth defying the world for. The sun rose pale and cold over the plains, painting the ranch in shades of gold and gray. The storm had passed, but the ground still glistened with dew and the smell of wet hay hung thick in the air. Elias McGraw stepped out of the barn, rifle slung over his shoulder, eyes scanning the ridge beyond his land. He'd hardly slept. The weight of his decision pressed like a stone on his chest. Inside the loft, Nathaniel Brooks was awake too, sitting quietly on a bale of hay, staring at his mud-stained hands. Downstairs, Clara moved through the small kitchen, humming softly as she poured coffee into tin cups. She tried to focus on the warmth of the morning, not the unease that lurked in her stomach. Elias entered, boots muddy, hat low over his brow. He's still up there, he said. Has he eaten? Not yet. I'll take him something. Clara set down a plate of biscuits and bacon. Let me, she said. He hesitated. You sure? She nodded. Sometimes people talk easier when they're reminded they're still human. He looked at her for a long moment, then gave a small nod. All right. But holler if you see anything off. Clara smiled faintly. You mean if he starts confessin', or runnin'? Elias's lips twitched. Either one. Clara climbed the ladder into the loft. Nathaniel was sitting by the window watching sunlight stream through the slats. He looked older than she remembered from the train, eyes lined, shoulders slumped. I brought breakfast, she said gently, setting the tray beside him. He looked up, voice hoarse. You didn't have to. I wanted to. He hesitated before taking the plate. It's been a while since someone offered me anything without wantin' something in return. She folded her hands. Not everyone out here's cruel, Mr. Brooks. Call me Nathaniel, he said softly. She nodded. Nathaniel then. Do you have proof of what you said? About the men who framed you? He swallowed hard. Used to. I carried ledgers, the only copy that survived the fire. But they found me before I could show 'em to the marshals. Took everything. Her heart sank. Then how will you clear your name? I don't know, he admitted. But runnin' ain't living either. I'm tired, Miss Clara. Tired of lookin' over my shoulder. Her voice softened. Then maybe it's time to stop runnin'. He looked at her, then down at his hands again. Maybe you're right. Outside, Elias was chopping wood when he saw a cloud of dust rising from the road. Riders? 3 of them. He set down the axe, his jaw tightening. When the glint of metal badges caught the morning light, his gut twisted. The sheriff. By the time they reached the gate, Clara had come outside, sensing the change in the air. Nathaniel watched from the loft window, his pulse thundering. Morning, McGraw, Sheriff Dempsey called as he dismounted. Got word a fugitive might be in these parts. Nathaniel Brooks, bookkeeper turned thief. Elias wiped sweat from his brow, calm but alert. You're covering a lot of ground, Sheriff. You think he's fool enough to stop here? The sheriff smirked. Desperate men do stupid things. Storm could have trapped him close. You seen anyone suspicious? Elias's voice was steady. Just me, my horses, and the lady I took in. Dempsey's gaze flicked toward Clara, lingering a moment too long. That's so. Clara straightened, meeting his eyes without flinching. We've seen no one, Sheriff. I promise you that. He tipped his hat, but there was doubt in his eyes. All right, ma'am. Still, we'll take a look around if you don't mind. Elias stepped forward, blocking the barn door. I do mind. You got no warrant, and this here's private land. Dempsey narrowed his gaze. You hidin' something, McGraw? Elias's hand rested on the butt of his revolver, casual but deliberate. Only thing I'm hidin' is my patience. The deputy shifted uneasily. Clara's heart hammered. She knew one wrong move could turn this into bloodshed. Finally, Dempsey snorted and tugged his reins. Fine. But if I find out you're lyin' for that man McGraw, you'll hang beside him. They turned and rode off, leaving a trail of dust behind. When the last hoofbeat faded, Clara let out the breath she'd been holding. That was too close. Elias exhaled slowly. They'll be back. Men like Dempsey don't quit easy when there's a bounty involved. Nathaniel climbed down from the loft, face pale. You should have turned me in. I've brought trouble to your door. Elias fixed him with a hard look. You think handing you over to men like Dempsey would have fixed a damn thing? I've seen justice twisted before. He turned toward Clara. You believe him, don't you? She met his gaze steadily. Yes, I do. Maybe that's foolish, but I believe God brought him here. Same way he brought me. Elias's expression softened, a faint sadness in his eyes. You sure about that? Clara nodded. I'm sure. He looked between them, two strangers bound by fate and faith, and something inside him shifted again. Maybe this wasn't just about right and wrong anymore. Maybe it was about redemption. His, theirs, and the kind that didn't need permission from the law. That night, the sky turned violet with the coming dusk. Clara stood on the porch, the wind tugging at her hair. Elias joined her, silent for a long moment. You ever think, he said quietly, maybe the people who cross our path, even the wrong ones, are meant to teach us something? She smiled faintly. I think that's God's favorite trick. Us thinking we're lost, when really we're being led. Elias looked toward the horizon, the same direction the sheriff had gone. Then I reckon he's leadin' us straight into a storm. Clara turned to him, voice steady. Then we'll face it together. He didn't answer, but his silence said everything. And as the last light of day faded across the plains, Elias McGraw, the man who'd sworn to never trust again, realized that maybe, just maybe, love had already walked right through his door, disguised as trouble. The sun had set long ago, leaving the ranch bathed in silver light. The prairie stretched endless and quiet, a sea of whispering grass beneath the moon. Only the soft creak of the barn door and the low murmur of voices broke the stillness. Elias McGraw sat at the table, his revolver dismantled before him, cleaning oil glistening on his fingers. His jaw was tight, his eyes focused, but his thoughts were far away. Across from him, Clara mended a torn sleeve, her candle casting a warm halo over her face. Nathaniel Brooks rested in the loft, half asleep but restless. He'd offered to leave that morning, but Elias wouldn't hear of it. You step outside now, he'd said, and Dempsey'll string you up before you draw a breath. Now the three of them lived in uneasy peace, fugitives of circumstance and conscience. Clara set her needle down, her voice soft but steady. You can't stay up all night waiting for them, Elias. He didn't look up. Not waiting. Just preparing. She folded her hands, watching him. You think preparing means fighting. Sometimes it means trusting. He paused, a flicker of something breaking through his hardened shell. Trustin' got me burned before. She tilted her head. Then maybe you trusted the wrong people. Not everyone's looking to hurt you. Their eyes met, and for the first time he didn't look away. Just then a sound cut through the stillness, hoofbeats. Distant but deliberate. Elias was on his feet instantly, gun in hand, eyes sharp as glass. Clara rose too, her breath catching. Nathaniel's voice came from above. They found me. Elias moved to the window, peering through the glass. No, only one rider. The moonlight caught on the stranger's coat, a marshal's badge. Elias's voice dropped low. Stay here. He stepped outside into the cold, his boots sinking in damp earth. The rider dismounted slowly, hands raised in peace. Marshal Tate, he introduced himself. Lookin' for a Nathaniel Brooks. I heard he might be out this way. Elias's voice was firm but guarded. And what's your interest? Tate took a breath. Justice. The real kind. Turns out the man's been framed, I've got the papers to prove it. Elias stared at him. Say that again. The marshal reached into his coat, pulling out a small, weathered satchel. Inside were ledgers, The missing ones Nathaniel thought were gone. Found these in a lockbox the accountant's old partner kept hidden. He confessed before he died. Elias's grip on the revolver loosened. You're sure? Positive. Brooks is innocent. From the doorway Clara gasped softly. Nathaniel stepped out of the barn's shadows, face pale but eyes burning with relief. Marshall, he whispered. You mean? Tate smiled faintly. You're a free man's son. Nathaniel let out a shaky breath, shoulders sagging. After all this time? Clara's hand went to her heart, tears glinting in her eyes. Thank God, she breathed. Elias stood silent for a long moment, then clapped Nathaniel on the shoulder. Told you runnin' wasn't the way. Nathaniel smiled through the tremor in his voice. Guess you were right. Later that night, after the marshal rode off toward town with word to clear Nathaniel's name, the ranch fell quiet again. But this time the silence was peaceful. Nathaniel slept soundly in the loft for the first time in months. Clara stood on the porch looking up at the sky, stars scattered like diamonds across the black. Elias joined her, his coat draped over his shoulders. He'll be leaving come morning, he said softly. She nodded. He deserves his life back. They stood side by side in silence, watching the stars flicker. After a moment, Clara said quietly, You know, when I came here, I thought my life had ended. I'd lost everything, my home, my fiancé, my purpose. But somehow, being late turned out to be right on time. Elias turned to her, his voice barely above a whisper. You were meant to come here, Clara. Meant to walk off that train when you did. She looked up at him, really looked. The man who'd once been closed off, all edges and shadows, now stood before her with eyes softer than she'd ever seen. You saved me, she said. He shook his head. No. You saved me first. For a moment, neither moved. Then, with the night wind brushing gently between them, Elias reached out, hesitantly, and tucked a stray curl behind her ear. Clara didn't pull away. Guess sometimes, he murmured, redemption don't come in the form we expect. She smiled, her voice trembling. Sometimes it comes wearing boots and a broken heart. He laughed softly, the sound deep and warm. Then, as the stars shimmered above them, he leaned down and kissed her, a slow, reverent kiss that tasted of promise and peace. That night, under the vast western sky, two hearts that had been broken by time found something they never thought they'd feel again. A love born from mercy, lit by grace and strong enough to heal. And though the future was still uncertain, one thing was clear. Clara hadn't arrived a day too late. She'd arrived at the exact hour God meant her to. Morning dawned bright and gold, the kind of light that made everything shimmer, from the dew on the fence rails to the dust lifting off the trail. The air felt cleaner, lighter somehow, as if the land itself knew peace had finally come to the McGraw ranch. Nathaniel Brooks stood by Elias's wagon, hat in hand, a new strength in his posture. He traded his worn shirt for one of Elias's spares and his eyes, though tired, shone with relief. Clara packed him a small satchel of bread and dried fruit, her smile soft and sisterly. You sure you're ready? She asked. Nathaniel nodded. For the first time in years. Marshal Tate says there's work in Fort Laramie for a man who knows his numbers. I'll start fresh. Elias came up beside him, shaking his hand firmly. You do that. And don't come looking back over your shoulder, you hear? Nathaniel smiled faintly. Not unless it's to thank the folks who gave me a chance when no one else would. Clara's eyes misted. You'll always have a place here, Nathaniel. He tipped his hat. Reckon I'll carry that with me. And with that, he climbed onto the wagon and drove toward the horizon. The wheels creaking, the horses snorting, the morning sun turning the world gold behind him. Clara stood beside Elias, watching him fade into the distance until the dust swallowed him whole. The days that followed brought calm, real calm, not the kind that hid pain beneath it. Clara tended the garden, her laughter finally easy. Elias worked the fields, his hands steady, his eyes softer. The walls of the ranch house no longer echoed with silence but with life. The hum of hope returned. One evening, as spring rolled across the plains, Elias found her on the porch again. She was reading a letter, Nathaniel's handwriting neat and careful. He says he's found a place, she said, smiling. He's teaching the banker's boy his sums. Says he feels useful again. Elias leaned against the railing, watching her. Good man. Deserved that. She looked up, teasing softly. And what about you, Mr. McGraw? You ever think you deserve peace? He chuckled low. I reckon I stopped thinking I deserved anything long ago. Maybe you should start again, she said, eyes twinkling. You've earned it. Their gazes lingered, warm, familiar, and full of quiet love. Weeks later, the small chapel in town filled with soft music and the scent of wildflowers. Clara stood at the front, wearing a simple cream dress that brushed her ankles. Her hair was loose, threaded with daisies. Elias waited for her, clean-shaven for the first time anyone could remember, his hands trembling slightly as she walked down the aisle. The townsfolk whispered, the widow who came on the wrong train and the cowboy who never smiled, now joining their hearts before God. When she reached him, Elias took her hands, voice low and rough. "I used to think time only took things from me," he said. "My family. My joy. My reason to hope. But then you showed up, late as you please, and gave it all back." Clara's eyes shimmered. "Maybe I wasn't late, Elias. Maybe I just arrived when you were ready to believe again." He smiled, a rare, unguarded smile that made her breath catch. "You're right on time, Clara McGraw." And with those words, the preacher declared them husband and wife. That evening, back at the ranch, they danced under the stars. No music but the crickets and the soft wind through the grass. The lanterns swayed on the porch beams, casting gold light across the yard. Elias held her close, his rough hands gentle at her waist. "Think we'll ever stop thankin' the good Lord for missed trains?" he murmured. Clara laughed softly against his chest. "Never. Sometimes the wrong arrival time brings the right forever." He kissed her forehead, pulling her closer as the night wrapped around them. Two souls redeemed by grace, joined by fate, and held together by the kind of love that never arrives too late. In a world of dust and danger, two hearts learned that God's timing isn't early or late, it's perfect. And sometimes the miracle you pray for simply comes a day later.